first episode of Call to the Bar International Law Over Drinks for Season 3, which I think will make it episode 63 of the podcast. I am your hostess with the mostest, Tamsin Phillipa Paige, Associate Professor at Deakin Law School. Today we are discussing feminist careers in international law, and I'm a little excited by my guests for this discussion. I'm joined by my dear friend and mentor, Professor Dianne Otto of Melbourne Law School, also Professor Christine Chinkin from London School of Economics and Political Science, and Judge Hilary Charlesworth of the ICJ, who is also a professor at Melbourne Law School and the Australian National University. Who better than this amazing panel to discuss what a feminist career in international law can look like? Before we begin, I remind everyone that in these informal conversations, we are, as always, speaking off the cuff and without the benefit of footnotes, and nothing we say should be taken to have been thoroughly peer-reviewed. I will also note that our guests are speaking in their personal capacity, and nothing they say can be attributed to their employers or any other organisation they work with. And before we get down to business, our traditional first question, Christine, Di, Hilary, what's your drink?
Well, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, so I'm afraid it's a cup of tea. And it's a cup of tea made with proper loose leaf tea, not tea bags.
Excellent. What particular blend of tea is your preference?
Oh, English breakfast, builders, whatever you want to call it.
Fair enough. I generally go with an Earl Grey, but I'm a little quirky that way.
Not at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Hilary, you're also quite early in the morning, aren't you?
Yes, and I've got, I thought in honor, I was preparing this question for a long time, Tamsin, but I thought, what's a really good drink to have? And I've got the best drink in the Netherlands, which I think is their fresh mint tea. So it's just one of the great, anybody coming to the Netherlands, please order a fresh mint tea. It's a Dutch specialty, and you'll never go back to dried mint tea after this.
Excellent. Di?
I'm going to say stolen from North Africa, I think, Hilary.
If I was speaking to you in the morning, I would have my long black coffee. Sorry, the mint tea wouldn't quite do it, or the English breakfast tea. But since it's the evening, after this interview, I'm going to go and have a glass of red wine. I might fall asleep in the middle if I have it during.
Fair enough.
What time is it for you?
It's 7.
What time is it for you?
7 p.m.
Right.
Well, very restrained, Di.
Thanks, Hilary.
And being something of a summery evening in Canberra, I have an Australian classic of a non-alcoholic ginger beer. So nice and refreshing for a summery evening. So now, normally new guests to the podcast are asked to describe their careers and how they went about it, but that's somewhat the focus of this episode. So let's get on with the main event, shall we? Now, you have all already had very distinguished careers so far as academics and feminist international lawyers, and you have all engaged in feminist praxis in these careers by supporting, mentoring, and championing the careers of juniors coming through after you. And as someone who has received this support, let me say thank you on behalf of all of us. That said, you have all punctuated these sensational feminist legal work with different focuses. Hilary, your academic work has sat alongside your work in the judicial space and has now taken a backseat to your permanent work as an ICJ judge. Christine, your career has been highlighted by the work you've done as an expert advisor to various government and international bodies. And Di, you came to law in your late 30s as an extension of your activism and community organising. Notably, all of your careers have intertwined with each other. How would you all describe your careers and how they've interacted with each other? I'm going to let anyone choose who wants to talk first on this one.
Go on, Hilary. You start.
Oh, Lord. Well, how would I describe? This has been a question that's been exercising me, Tamsin, since I heard about the topic of this podcast. I think I'd describe my career, if I'm being honest, as rather haphazard in the sense that I think you only see a career when you look back. And along the way, it seems as though you're making decisions about what you're doing based on either sometimes intuition. I've done things completely on intuition, or because of family commitments, because of what your partner, your children, your other people in your life are doing and needing. So I describe my career as sort of stops and starts and many detours. But I think the most precious thing about the career, and it's fantastic to be on the same podcast as Christine and Di, because in a way they, for me, represent sort of highlights of my career. Christine, first of all, I'm doing it in the order I met them. Christine and I met in the women's bathroom at a conference, an international law conference in Sydney in about 1988. We were both pretty junior academics in the Australian academic scene. And we were pretty well the only women at this conference. And we sort of bonded in the women's bathrooms. And then over the years and doing different things, we've ended up doing a lot of work together and writing together. And I was just thinking, I think maybe that's a feminist career, to just encounter a fantastic colleague who became a friend and being able to weave that through. So I think it's a real joy to be able to have a friend who's also very much in the same area. And my husband often says to me, your career is your sort of friendship group, and that's true to a large extent. And then Di, I would say, is representative of another fantastic strand in my own life, because I encountered the fiery and passionate Dianne Otto as a student. She was this standout student in an international human rights course that I taught, and I noticed this woman with her wonderful hair color and vivacity sitting in my class. But then when she started speaking, and then when she began to write essays, I kept thinking, who is this person who had such insight and knowledge and wrote so beautifully? So I think Di's representative to me of the fantastic students that I've been able to encounter along the way, who've become friends and colleagues, and whose careers I've just watched with great joy. So I hope that counts as a career.
I think it does.
Can I come in? Thank you, Hilary. And what you have just said, I think that, speaking for myself, but I think probably for all of us, the friendship and collegiality of our careers has been absolutely paramount throughout. It's been a joint effort, constantly collaborative, collegial, as I've just said. And the friendships, I think, more important in so many ways than the actual work. And again, certainly speaking for myself, I certainly wouldn't have done many of the things I've done without that collegiality, that friendship. But I would also, I think, two other things from what Hilary has just said. One has been timing. I mean, the timing when we met Hilary in that bathroom, I think, was also quite crucial. It was a moment when feminism in law in general was beginning to come up the agenda quite strongly. And the very male aspect of that particular conference, of international law in general, was something that I think we had almost in that first conversation. And that led us then with our colleague Shelley Wright, to write the Feminist Approaches to International Law, which really, certainly again for myself, kickstarted the whole journey, I think, with respect to feminism and international law. And it also was exactly at that moment, post the Nairobi conference in 1985, violence against women in particular was really coming up the agenda. Institutions were beginning to look at these issues. I think we were very fortunate. The timing was just extraordinary. And the other thing I still see myself primarily as an academic. And it's been the academic, the students, the teaching, and all that's flowed around that has also been crucial.
Well, I was in Hilary's class that year that the article that Christine's just talking about was published by the American Society of International Law in 1991. And I can remember, Hilary, you coming to class and letting us know that the American Journal still wanted more corrections or more clarifications. Like it was I gathered it was quite an arduous process to meet their criteria. And of course, they would have been, I'm assuming, pretty. This was a big move for them to actually publish an article on feminism in international law. So 1991 was, a pretty remarkable year for our network of women and other people who have been so important in making us in helping us to make the contributions that we've made. But I was, before coming to law, a community worker, and I started off working in a women's refuge and then worked with young people, and very much my sort of mantra was class, race and gender, that the three, for me at the time, significant pivots of discrimination that I was seeing in the refuge as well as amongst young people, and the law seemed to be a problem in all of these settings. So I can't really explain why I decided that it was time to do a law degree, but I'm so glad I did. It was so fantastic to be a student again in the first place and have the opportunity to think rather than kind of go from crisis to crisis and not manage much time for reflection. And then at Melbourne Law School, where I was for 2 of the years of my degree, there were feminist teachers. So it was Hilary, of course, in international law, but Jenny Morgan was there, and there was some Rosemary Hunter, and there was a kind of a mini revolution going on in the law school with these really fantastic teachers. So I came across Christine through Hilary because Hilary was my supervisor for my research project, which is where you get to write a more extended essay, and they offered to publish it in a journal that they were editing called Transnational Law and Contemporary Problems. And they also, in that same issue, published Karen Knopf's, maybe it was a student piece as well, but one of her early pieces, and it was a fantastic introduction to the feminist network that has supported me all along.
Thank you so much for that kind of wonderfully interwoven tale. And I would just like to say that that model of community and feminist careers being about the people in there is one that I have definitely experienced and seen in my career and my interaction with my feminist colleagues as I'm going through. We're trying to build good, strong community that supports one another in our scholarship. So it's good to see that that's kind of an ongoing theme continuing on within feminist international law spaces. So moving on to our next question, because I think it kind of builds off that, is briefly, because I know that we could talk about this for hours, how do you understand feminism and how has it shaped the ethics you've brought to your international law careers and academic careers?
I think we should go in reverse order this time.
That's me in the middle every time.
No, you'll be first. Next question.
Okay, so I had the advantage maybe of already being a very active feminist when I came to law. And I was a bit surprised, I suppose, that feminism was only just starting to really have a broad voice in international law. Now, of course, there'd been feminists in human rights law all along, feminists in law and development all along, but they were very it was a very marginalised, it was very, sequestered in those kind of more womanly areas of law. And anyway, in both those areas, that it wasn't as if feminism was kind of accepted by states. It was always a battle, and it was always the need to rethink your strategy. But anyway, I didn't know any of that really before I got to my international law and human rights law classrooms. And I guess I was looking for another way to come at challenging inequalities. And neoliberalism had really changed the relationship between governments and community groups that they funded. And so by the late 80s, community groups were funded to deliver on government policy, to implement government policy, rather than to bring about any change. So things that were even in constitutions of, say, women's refuges or youth housing groups, like law reform or like revolution, should I say, were not funded, right? It was very clear that we weren't being funded to do these things. So, it wasn't really until I got to my international law classes that I realised suddenly emerged the NGO sector. And they were kind of invisible. Community groups, non-government organisations were invisible in the domestic law context. But in the international law, they suddenly had a role. And so that's what really interested me. And I realised that I could engage with activists through my research. And that really, I felt really comfortable with being able to do that. I guess I saw that the classroom was a way to be an activist. I really enjoyed, like Christine has just said, I really enjoyed a lot of my teaching, especially with master's students and PhD students who came to the law like I had, with some experience, that they were confident enough about their experience to bring it into their thinking about the law and what it was doing and what it could do. So I might stop there because I don't know if I've even answered the question, but that's where I'll leave it.
To pick up on something Di said, you used the word strategy, Di. And I think I was just a very boring academic, basically. And it had never occurred to me that NGOs, activists, I've come out the reverse way to you, Di. You came from activism to law. I came from being an academic into activism, essentially. Because again, following up from the article, suddenly a number of different NGOs and different groups began getting in touch with us and asking us essentially for legal framing of the strategies that they wanted to pursue. And really asking us to try to provide the legal arguments that they could take to governments or take to policymakers, take to whoever it was that they were trying to influence. And this, to me, was a completely new way of thinking about, well, how does one use feminism in pragmatic, practical type ways? And I think as time's gone on, and probably Hilary has had even more, add more to this, the realizing that the strategy and the approach to using feminism very much depends upon what your objective is at any particular moment. I mean, so to give a concrete example, I was involved in the negotiation of the Council of Europe Convention on combating and addressing violence against women, the Istanbul Convention. And there the strategy had to switch constantly between what can we actually get, and what can we get into the text, and what would we like to get into the text. So at different occasions, there were two of us who were what they called scientific advisors, both strong feminists. And we would spend quite a long time talking between ourselves before going into the negotiation sessions about, what should we push for? And if we push for a great deal? Should we then be content if we don't get quite as much as we actually wanted? And so I think clearly, Di's just set it out. The obvious goal is to try to address inequalities across gender, race, etc. So that was always the main objective. But I feel that I find myself taking a very different approach in academic theoretical writing in the classroom to how I do if I'm in a more pragmatic, practical situation.
Yeah, I certainly, it's hard to come up with a pithy definition of feminism because it means so many different things. But I love Di's sort of start of the idea that it's an interest, it's a concern with the way that gender, race, class, abilities, sexuality, physical ability, all of these things interact so that there's not just a single axis.
Yeah.
I think I began to see this, and I think you see it particularly, so you can have, the feminist movement, I suppose, in my era, when it started in Australia, was very much a focus on women's inequality in society, which is real and manifest, and I think remains that way. But the idea, I think, especially on the international plane, it was obvious that that wasn't the only axis that you needed to consider things, and that obviously nationality, race, status, sexuality began to emerge, I think. And these were all very, very important. And I think now the idea of what equality and what non-discrimination, what forms of non-discrimination to be interested in, has certainly broadened. And you see that reflected perhaps in a somewhat muted way, but you see that reflected in, say, some of the work of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, who now have to face a lot of different negotiating. I'm sure there'd be some who wanted to have stronger statements, but we certainly see that, I think, invaluably recognised in CEDAW. But I think what's interesting, I've always thought was interesting in feminist thought, was there's a political and a policy side that says we are concerned with these inequalities, the way they entwine, the way they reinforce one another, and what we should do. So, and then there's the idea that and perhaps this is more the scholarly side, but not always, the idea of analysing the way that our knowledge is gendered. So you've got, if it's a rather crude distinction between policy and political goals, and then we've also saying, but wait, when we just start slowly unpicking in any field, I think of the work because she's Australian and known to us, and another former law student from the Melbourne University faculty. I was thinking, reading Anna Funder's recent book on wifedom, how the life of Eileen O'Shaughnessy, George Orwell's wife, was effectively written out of all the previous biographies. And I think that's a very nice example of what a lot of feminist scholars have tried to do in international law, is to say, hang on, who's missing? Now, Anna has done in this beautiful way, she's discovered letters, she's done a tremendous amount of research, she's travelled, and perhaps feminist international lawyers don't necessarily do that, but try to uncover through careful work, how has our knowledge become so gendered? How are some of even the fundamental norms of our discipline, how are they based on gendered models? So, and sometimes, and people have pointed this out, I think of Elizabeth Gross, the feminist philosopher, who pointed this out in a beautiful article back in the 80s about the inevitable tensions between the political goals of feminism and the scholarly questioning. And there's often, there can be some tensions between groups of feminists. But I've always loved Di's, she said in one of her wonderful articles at some point, how should we understand feminism? And she used the idea of a network, so that sometimes people will say, oh, well, you think that, but I've got a feminist over here who would just completely disagree with you. And I think it's a much more productive way to think about feminism as a network of different thinking. Or another favorite image of mine, which I think is along the same lines, is one by an art critic, an art historian, Griselda Pollock. And she's conceived feminism as a landscape. And you sort of think of different villages almost, and different groups sort of populating the landscape, but they're all over, and they may sign on to some of what I've said, but not everything, and they'll certainly have very different methods. But I think navigating those different networks or settlements, if you like, is the task of feminist scholarship today.
Look, I would agree with everything that's been said there, especially that centrality of an ethic of equality. But what you said there at the end about that network drawing on Di's work actually draws me to Gina Heathcote's 2019 book on feminist dialogues and international law, and how she's engaged with this idea about different feminisms engaging with one another and with other forms of critical theories. So I think that that's a really resonant understanding. Let's go with understanding of how we can look at feminism and how it affects and what we bring to our scholarship. I do want to have a follow-up question that's not on the script, but everyone can feel free to say no, I don't want to answer this. What's your take on the growing global backlash against equality that we're seeing in political landscapes? And this is not focused on any one particular forum, it's just a general trend that we're seeing is backlash against equality within political landscapes.
I'm horrified. Oh, sorry, Christine, you go first.
No, you go, Di.
I mean, it just brings home to me how precarious the gains that we've made as feminists are, and that we can't ever think that the struggle is finished. And I mean, I guess at one level, I think it's a backlash to the gains that we have made. But another level, I just think it's not even that. It's just about the assertion of power in the grids that it's been known, and that it still hangs on. It's got a persistence of, the idea of man and wife, and then writ large, Daddy Trump as the European, I think it was the German president called him. These imaginaries have real resonance in so many people's lives. People feel compelled to comply. I don't know.
I mean, I think Di said it. I mean, I think maybe we were over optimistic, but I think there was a feeling that progress was continuous. And what we very clearly learned is that progress is not linear, it's not inevitable, that it is very, very easy to lose what we thought we had gained, that we're hanging on with our fingertips to what we've got. And I think sort of two particular points to add on to that. One is this abusive gender ideology. I mean, it's become ideological to challenge understandings of gender, and to then use that ideology in ways that are completely abusive to concepts of equality. And we are seeing the attraction, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, to authoritarian governments, to those who are seeking to gain and hold on to power, of using that gender ideology. And within that gender ideology, including all the things that we've been talking about, race, class, in particular sexuality, of course, and the determination to continue control over people's bodies, and particularly over reproduction. I mean, it's just terrifying how it is being used and how that filters down to politicians, to public statements. There's a level of misogyny that is now accepted in public life that I've certainly not experienced previously in my lifetime. And it's not called out, it's accepted, it's becoming mainstream. I think you said at the beginning, Di, it's horrifying.
Yeah, thank you for that. On to something possibly a bit lighter after that more heavy conversation is, do you have any stories or moments that stand out that you'd like to share from your careers?
Can I tell one about Christine?
Please go forth.
Thank you.
No, but I think I hope she'll forgive me telling this story. But I remember when we first became friendly, and then she told me she was wanting to apply from being a lecturer to being a senior lecturer, and this was at the University of Sydney. And that's as far as I'm going in identifying anybody here, except for Christine. And then we were discussing, and this was the days, I know all you young people won't ever imagine this, Tamsin, but this was before the internet, when you had to get on the phone or write a letter. And I remember Christine was preparing it, and she told me that a quite senior colleague had said to her, look, Christine, I would leave off all the feminist publications from your CV. I still recall that today, that was a reality in the academic world that was just as well. Christine had award-winning articles on, let's say, more mainstream international law topics, such as third parties in international law. But the fact that this was seen to be very helpful, and I think kind advice by a supporter, just leave out the feminism. So I think perhaps that might still happen today. I would be interested.
It does. I had a
It
junior,
does. Oh dear. Okay.
I've got a junior colleague whose advisor told her to, if she wants a job, to not let it be known that she's a feminist.
But even to the point of leaving those things, just ghost them from your CV. Okay.
Yeah, that's
very worrying.
Ghost from all of her scholarship that she was a feminist. She didn't, and she's working with me at Deakin, and she's excellent. Alice Witt is a phenomenal feminist scholar looking at digital constitutionalisms and gendered harms from that. But yeah, she was advised to keep the fact that she's a feminist a secret if she wanted a job.
And I will just add on to the end of that story that I got a very patronizing comment of, well, your work's not bad when you get away from that other stuff that you will do. Yes.
So for me, I mean, some of these same issues come up now around work that people have done with queering international law. And I think see, I always find this difficult when it's a young scholar, because I came, as we've said, to law as already middle-aged, and I think it was easier for me to at least claim my feminism when I'm, an adult, and kind of a different kind of young scholar, new scholar, emerging scholar, however you want to call me. But I guess I want to, as my little cameo of an experience I'll never forget, was at the Beijing Women's Conference. And it's actually where I met Christine, because we were both part of a delegation that went to one of the Beijing universities to talk about feminism, which was, a lovely experience. But anyway, at the conference, I joined the several caucuses of NGO, groupings, and one was the sexuality, the lesbian caucus. And a lot of the Women's Human Rights Caucus members didn't come to the lesbian caucus. Again, strategically is how they'd explain it, because they didn't want to give any reason to states that weren't friendly to diminish the Women's Human Rights Caucus by saying, oh, they're just a bunch of lesbians. But anyway, there was a lot of anti-lesbian feeling at the conference. But I agreed to go to the African caucus. So there were caucuses for regions to ask people if they would encourage their governments to support the references to sexual orientation in the Beijing Platform for Action. And off I go. But this is kind of finding ways to broaden out, or to be inclusive, or to be a network that includes everyone, if you know what I mean. So there I am sitting in the African caucus, and the chairwoman says, well, we'll put you last on the agenda. That's fine. That's completely fine. But there I'm sitting hearing about poverty, civil conflicts, lack of health care, lack of access to education. And I'm thinking, oh my God, so how does sexuality fit into these kind of huge issues? And I got up at the end, and the chairperson asked everyone to stay seated to allow me to speak. So she was afraid everyone would just leave. And I said, it's a self-determination in terms of sexuality is just as important as self-determination as peoples, as colonial subjects, as women, and so on. And there was just silence. But then afterwards, I reckon 3 different women from the caucus came up to me in the corridors on different occasions and said, thank you for coming and saying that at the caucus. And I thought, right, you never can tell, the kind of the overall sort of culture of a group doesn't mean that everyone in the group is feeling the same way. And as feminists, I think it's really important to be courageous when we're faced with challenges like finding ways to talk to each other.
Can I come in? I was going to tell a different anecdote, but Di reminded me about Beijing. And I mean, Beijing was in so many ways our moment of optimism. There were issues, as you've just said, Di, but nevertheless. But I was sitting on a plane going home, and there was who I thought to be an elderly woman sitting next to me. And she was obviously from South Asia. It turned out she was from Nepal, in fact. And when I sat on the plane, she said, oh, I hope you don't mind. I'm terrified of flying, absolutely terrified. Can I hold your hand? Well, she did more than hold my hand. She gripped me. I was bruised all over when we eventually landed can't remember where it was. We were changing planes. But anyway, we got talking, and turned out, in fact, we were pretty much contemporaries. And it links with Hilary's about the vernacularization as well. She'd come from a border village in Nepal. She'd been working for years, essentially trying to help young women who'd been trafficked over the border from Nepal into India, were trying to come home, were trying to be reintegrated into their own societies, all the challenges that they were facing, both in terms of stigma, both in terms of being re-trafficked. And the village had essentially decided that they didn't quite know what was going to go on in Beijing, but somebody ought to go. And they had literally pooled all their resources to send her. And I'll just never forget what she said. She said, I thought that we were the only people who were having to have these problems, having to deal with these young girls who were facing these absolutely dreadful. And I got to Beijing, and I discovered that there are other people working on this, that there are laws against it, that there is, back to your words, Di, that there is a network, and that I'm now part of something that I never, ever thought that I would be. And that really, to me, was the message of Beijing and the message of feminism, and that was giving her a strength in a situation I could never imagine, at all. I've often wondered when she got home, what. But isn't that what it's about at the end of the day?
That's actually a really set of beautiful stories, and thank you for sharing them. I actually don't know what to say. That's gorgeous. I am going to now have to ask the next question though, because we've got to keep going. But what advice would each of you give to early career researchers or junior lawyers who want to pursue a decidedly feminist career in international law?
Well, I would just say I'll be very keen to hear what Christine and Di say, but I'm not sure you can plan a feminist career. I think maybe the very nature of a feminist career, but to be a feminist international lawyer, I think, well, I would say, first of all, and this is advice I would give generally, but I think everybody should be a feminist international lawyer. But I think avoid false timetables is the first thing I'd say. So people sometimes come into, and I think lawyers are perhaps particularly bad at this, come in and think, oh, there's a set of milestones. I need to do this by this time, this by this time. And unless I'm, sort of well advanced on my career, by the time some arbitrary age, I'm 40, then basically I'm over the hill, and I won't do it. And I just say there are many paths to do what you want, and I think we should, of course, people's lives are shaped and very much by the lives and the needs of the people around them who they perhaps need to care for or are responsible for. But I would say, so as long as you feel that you're in a job where you can choose it rather than having it foisted on you by others or by circumstances, that's the ideal position to get into. That's not always easy because there'll be personal things, there'll be financial things that might push you. But I'd say so one should take a slow cooking approach to your career. That's one thing I would say. And the other thing is to, as you've sort of, I hope the listeners are sensing that, to make use, I think the thing that feminist work in international law has given us above all is the brilliant and various, sometimes conflicting, sometimes enormously supportive networks. And I think you can plug in relatively easily. For example, join your national international law society, join a regional one, try and connect in online seminars, try and contact people. So I would just say that that's I think it is a very open, warm, and supportive community, and you just have to tap into it. So those are the two things I'd say.
I find that a very, very difficult. We've already touched on the problems of, being told to not show that you're a feminist, if for promotion, etc., etc. I think everything Hilary has just said has her usual absolute good sense and warmth and compassion. I think the only two things I'd say is carry your feminism with you at all times, so that in situations that are not necessarily immediately obvious to you as advancing a feminist career, there are often opportunities within that, in fact, to it's back to your feminist ethics. Carry those constantly as part of it. But at the same time, I think try to be as good a lawyer as possible in all types of situations. We know that feminist work is often challenged. If your legal work cannot be challenged because it is of the absolute highest quality, that also gives greater weight, I think, to the feminist work within that. I don't know if that makes any sense. The other is resilience. As Hilary has just said, there are often obstacles, there are often opportunities that you might not necessarily see at the time, but to be resilient, keep going is, probably not necessarily great advice, but I think probably needs to be there.
And I totally agree with everything that Hilary and Christine have said. I think for me, I think try and always be true to yourself is the way I'd put it. And I think that um, often students or younger academics think about law as a place in which they need to kind of be neutral, that objective, and perhaps haven't even really thought about what it is that they want to achieve by being here, what is meaningful for them to aim for in law teaching, law scholarship, law collegiality. And I remember I asked Tamsin years ago what made her interested in the Security Council. And Tamsin said to me, well, actually, it's because I've experienced so much violence in my own life. I want to understand when violence might be acceptable in international law. And I thought that so many students don't really figure out until much later why they're in law or why they're interested in, say, contract law or, torts or international law. And I think if you can figure it out, that will be really helpful for you in being able to kind of then start to bring your experience and your commitments to equality, inclusivity, anti-hierarchy, things like that, those ethics, I suppose, into your actual work.
And if I can just add on and just to, I think both Chris and Di have said something I just would like to endorse very, very much, and that's the idea of being true to yourself. Or when you say, how can I be a feminist lawyer? I think obviously many legal environments aren't easy spaces to raise these questions, I think. I mean, I'm sort of taken aback and a bit cast down by Tamsin's own, sort of knowledge that this might. I sort of, now that I've left the academy, I have this rosy idea that it's this perfect place. And perhaps I'm overly romanticizing it. But I think the idea of, I think a feminist in a workplace is somebody who is willing to speak out and to name discrimination or inequality or racism, sexism, anything when they see it. Because I think many legal contexts, law firms, so on, universities, it seems, other environments, other legal institutions, are ones where sometimes I think people are fearful, oh, if I speak out, if I say, look, I found that very difficult when you said X, Y, or Z, women are just like that, or people make broad, sweeping statements. But to be willing to speak out, not always, sometimes it has to be quietly, you just go and see the person if that's possible, or just saying, I found that comment made me feel uncomfortable. Just somehow calling out that behavior, I think, is very important. It's not always easy to do. And I think especially if you're more junior in a hierarchy, it's more difficult. But I see a responsibility, especially as I've got older. Well, what's one thing I can do? And that's trying to, I'm not always successful, and but it's part of the resilience that Christine spoke about before too. I think just be able to name when you see a situation that's unfair. It might be unfair pay grades, it might be a comment made in a meeting, but just to call it out, just to say that made me feel uncomfortable. We're in the 21st century here, past the first quarter, we're into the second quarter, and that's not acceptable. So that's one thing that I think we should try and practice.
Thank you all.
I constantly fail to do it, let me say. I
think we all fail to do it,
yeah.
But it's still good to have an idea and an ideal to work and strive towards. And it's all really fantastic advice. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. we are going to wrap up, and in wrapping up, we have a fairly traditional question, which is, what is each of you doing to escape and unwind from international law? What are you doing to kind of find some peace and relaxation away from international law in your lives?
Well, I love my garden. So I do a lot of gardening. But, if it comes to more light entertainment, I love Vera, the detective, the British detective series, where she's just full of care for the people that should be cared about, who she calls pet, unless she's using it ironically. And she's, doesn't care how she looks. She's just a magnificent role model in so many ways. And I enjoy her very much.
I've only read her. I've never seen
Ah,
any of the programs. Oh gosh, what do I do? Play with my cats, talk to the cats, grandchildren. I mean, I've retired, so I can, in theory at least, say I don't care about international law anymore. But it doesn't seem to quite work like that. But I can at least choose the bits of international law that I really want to, which at the moment seems to be primarily telling the UK government that it's in breach of international law. Theatre,
Uh,
theatre, theatre is very definitely a big
yeah,
escape.
Christine goes to the theatre sometimes once or twice a week, and if you ever catch up with her and you say she's like a theatre guide, she's like an online guide to what's on, and she's now got her granddaughters enrolled in her theatre going program at very young ages. And yeah, but that's, well, two things. One overlaps with Di in that I'm very passionate about my vegetable garden, and there's nothing that it gives me just huge pleasure to be in it. But I have to admit, it's not here in The Hague. It's a long way away on the south coast of New South Wales. But I do have a very beloved vegetable garden, and I fight there with the bandicoots that seem to really love ploughing up the garden and eating the young vegetables. That gives me great pleasure. But here in the much colder Hague, a thing that I do that I find a complete escape is cross-stitch embroidery. So I find that having to focus on counting the stitches, and I've been doing some samplers, just old-fashioned samplers for my granddaughters, just gives me a lot of pleasure, and it's very mindful because you cannot think about anything else. So those are two escapes.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your time in coming on the podcast and sharing your lives and your careers with me and our listeners. So that's all we have time for. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Tamsin.
Tamsin.
That's it.